Today, we're diving into one of the most important books ever written, Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. This isn't just a book, it's a journey into the absolute core of what it means to be human, into survival, resilience, and the one thing that can keep us going when everything else is gone.
So let's just start with the central question of the entire book. Really think about it. You take away someone's home, their food, their family, their freedom, even their name. What is possibly left? What is that spark that allows one person to endure the absolute unimaginable while someone else just gives up? That's the question that drives this entire story.
And the man who lived this question was Viktor Frankl. He was an Austrian psychiatrist, but he wasn't just thinking about this stuff in some comfortable office. No, he lived it. As a prisoner in Nazi concentration camps, including Auschwitz, he saw the absolute best and the absolute worst of humanity. And get this, after he was finally liberated, he wrote this entire book in just 9 days. He just felt this incredible urgency to share what he had learned in the darkest place on earth.
So what was the big idea? What did he learn? Well, it's this. Frankl basically threw a wrench in the psychological theories of his day. He said, look, our main drive in life isn't the pursuit of pleasure, like Freud said, and it's not the pursuit of power, like Adler said. He believed our deepest, most fundamental human drive is our will to find meaning. That, he argued, is our real purpose.
So here's how we're going to break this down. We'll start with the will to meaning. Then we'll go deep into what survival in the camps was actually like. We'll talk about what he called the last human freedom. Then we'll look at his form of therapy called logotherapy. We'll explore why choosing meaning over happiness is so crucial. And finally, we'll talk about the responsibility of answering life's question.
All right, let's dive right in. Now, Frankl's philosophy, it wasn't born in the camps. It was actually forged years before with one single life-altering decision.
Okay, so picture this. Just before the war really explodes, Frankl gets what is basically a golden ticket, a visa to immigrate to America. His elderly parents were thrilled for him. This was his chance to escape, to be safe, to continue his important work. But he hesitated. How could he just leave them behind to face whatever horrors were coming? He was completely torn. He needed what he called a hint from heaven.
And then he got it. He sees this piece of marble on a table at his parents' house. His dad explains he'd found it in the rubble of the city's largest synagogue after the Nazis burned it to the ground. It was a piece of the Ten Commandments. So Frankl asks, which one is it? And his father tells him, honor thy father and thy mother.
And in that single moment, Frankl's decision was made. He let the visa expire, he stayed. And this tells you everything you need to know. For him, the search for meaning was never some abstract, philosophical idea. It was a real, lived choice about responsibility, a commitment he was willing to bet his life on.
And that commitment, that choice to stay, would be tested in the most brutal way imaginable. So let's now turn to the experiences that would become the foundation for his entire philosophy, his time in the concentration camps.
Frankl describes the journey itself. 1,500 people packed into a train, 80 to a single car, for days and nights. When the train finally stopped, someone shouted the name, Auschwitz. And even though that name already stood for pure horror, Frankl noticed this strange thing happening. He called it the delusion of reprieve, this desperate, illogical hope that maybe, just maybe, it wouldn't be as bad as they said.
Well, that delusion was shattered in minutes. As they got off the train, they were forced into a line for what Frankl grimly calls the finger game. A single SS officer stood there, and with a casual flick of his finger, he pointed either left or right. Right meant you were fit for work, left meant you weren't. For 90% of the people on Frankl's transport, that little point to the left was a death sentence. They were sent to the gas chambers within hours.
In the midst of all this horror, Frankl the psychiatrist never turned off. He was constantly observing, trying to understand the psychological journey that he and his fellow prisoners were on. And he noticed 3 very distinct phases everyone went through.
The first phase was just pure shock, that initial impact of arriving. The second was apathy, a kind of emotional death that was necessary to get through the daily routine. And the third phase was after they were liberated, and it came with its own set of surprisingly difficult challenges.
And this quote right here is key to his whole perspective. He realized that the prisoners' reactions, the shock, the dark humor, the numbness, none of that was a sign of mental illness. In a situation that is completely and totally insane, these reactions were not abnormal. They were the normal, sane responses of a healthy mind.
That second phase apathy was absolutely critical for survival. It was like growing a protective shell around your emotions. Frankl talks about how after just a few weeks, you could watch horrific things happen to other prisoners and not even flinch. Emotions like disgust, horror, pity, they were luxuries you just couldn't afford anymore. It was a defense mechanism against being constantly overwhelmed by suffering.
And yet, it was right here, in this state of complete degradation, this emotional death, that Frankl made his single most important discovery. This brings us to what he called the last human freedom.
This, right here, is probably the most famous and powerful idea in the whole book. Frankl realized that the Nazis could take everything from it. They could control his body, his surroundings, they could take his life. But there was one thing they could never, ever touch: his inner freedom to choose how he would respond to it all. That last freedom, the freedom to choose your own attitude, was completely untouchable.
Think about what that really means. It means that while you can't always control what happens to you in life, you always have control over your response. Your external circumstances might be terrible, but your internal world, your inner freedom, is yours alone. And that choice, whether to face suffering with dignity or to give in to despair, was a choice every prisoner had to make every single day.
To explain this, Frankl often used a quote from the philosopher Nietzsche: "He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how." And he saw this play out right in front of him. The prisoners who had the best chance of survival weren't always the strongest physically. They were the ones who had a why, a reason to keep going, a future goal, a loved one to see again. That purpose gave them the strength to endure the horrific how of the camps.
And Frankl's own why was the love for his wife. During these brutal, freezing marches in the dark, barely conscious, he would retreat into his mind and conjure up a vivid image of her. He would have entire conversations with her, hear her voice, see her smile. This rich inner life became his sanctuary, a source of strength that the guards and the fences could never take away.
And that experience led him to a profound truth about humanity. He wrote, "The salvation of man is through love and in love." He realized that even when you have literally nothing left in the outside world, you can still experience a kind of bliss just by thinking about someone you love. Love, he concluded, is the ultimate and highest goal we can aspire to.
So after the war, what did he do with all this incredible, hard-won knowledge? Well, he turned it into a new kind of psychotherapy, a way to help other people heal by helping them find their own meaning. He called it logotherapy. It comes from the Greek word logos, which means meaning, so you can think of it as meaning therapy. And unlike a lot of therapy that focuses on digging up your past, logotherapy is all about the future. It's about helping you discover the unique meaning that's waiting for you in your life.
The great thing is, Frankl made this super practical. He said meaning isn't some big, mysterious thing you have to go on a quest for. You can find it in your daily life through three main paths. First, by creating something or doing a deed. Second, by experiencing something beautiful or encountering someone, basically through love. And third, and this is the most powerful one, through the attitude you choose to take when you're faced with suffering you can't change.
Frankl's own story is the perfect example of that first path. When he entered Auschwitz, the guards took the scientific manuscript he'd been working on his whole life. It was everything to him. But instead of despairing, he found a new purpose. He started secretly reconstructing the entire book from memory, scribbling notes on tiny scraps of paper. That project, that why, became his anchor.
Okay, so how does a philosophy forged in the hell of a concentration camp apply to our lives today with our very different problems? Well, as we're about to see, his wisdom might be more relevant right now than ever before.
Frankl actually predicted that even in wealthy, comfortable societies, people would suffer from what he called an existential vacuum, a deep, nagging feeling of emptiness and meaninglessness. Sound familiar? This is the anxiety, the depression, the burnout we see everywhere. It's that feeling behind the Great Resignation, where people are quitting stable jobs because they're desperate to do something that actually feels like it matters.
And Frankl said that our culture's obsession with chasing happiness is a huge part of the problem. When you make happiness your direct goal, it's like trying to catch a shadow. It just slips away. It's a fleeting feeling. But the pursuit of meaning? That's different. Meaning isn't a feeling. It's about dedicating yourself to something bigger than you are. It's more stable. It makes you more resilient. And you find it by looking out at the world, not just inward at yourself.
He put it perfectly. He used to tell his students, "Don't aim at success.
For success, like happiness, cannot be pursued, it must ensue. It just happens, he said, as the unintended side effect of dedicating yourself to a cause greater than yourself. In other words, live a meaningful life, and happiness will take care of itself.
Okay, this brings us to our final section, and it all builds to this incredibly profound conclusion about our role and our responsibility in this whole search for meaning.
Frankl liked to tell this old story called Death in Tehran. A servant sees death in the marketplace, gets terrified, and begs his master for a horse so he can flee to the city of Tehran. The master agrees. A little later, the master runs into Death and asks him, "Why did you frighten my servant?" And Death replies, "I didn't frighten him. I was just surprised to see him here because I have an appointment with him tonight in Tehran." The point is, you can't outrun your fate.
Frankl lived that truth. Near the very end of the war, he had a real chance to escape the camp. But at the last second, he thought about his patients who were too sick to leave. They would be left all alone. And so he made the choice to stay behind and care for them. The moment he made that decision, he said, this incredible sense of peace washed over him. He chose to face his fate with purpose.
And this all leads to the final, brilliant twist of the entire book. We've been asking the question the wrong way around. We shouldn't be asking, what is the meaning of my life? Instead, we have to realize that it's life that is asking us the question. Every single day, life poses questions to us, and we answer not with our words, but with our actions. And so we'll end by turning that question back to you. Frankl's ultimate lesson is that life is constantly giving us tasks, constantly asking us to respond. Our whole job is to answer that call. So the question isn't what you expect from life. The question is, what is your life asking of you right now?